Hi everyone, I'm Sylvain Longuet, Research Assistant at the Cyberjustice Laboratory at the University of Montreal. Thank you for joining today's web conference. For today's webinar, we welcome Jason Thomas. Mr. Thomas is, amongst other things, president of the Collective Group, a technology firm specializing in data protection, risk management, and cybersecurity. Thank you very much for being with us today. Mr. Thomas will present on the topic individual cybersecurity, empowering employees to resist spear phishing to prevent identity theft and ransomware attacks. So without any further ado, Mr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to interact with Canadian scholars. I actually met my wife as the result of a project 20 years ago to redesign the health backup and recovery and data protection infrastructure for Health Canada. So I had the opportunity to go to every Canadian province and meet my wife, who is a graduate of the University of Guelph and was president of the Canadian University Society for Intercollegiate Debate, which I imagine a lot of our law students participated in their early university years. With that, we'll jump right in and go through the agenda. So the first thing we're going to do is I'll give you a brief introduction to myself and my background, just so you can understand the perspective of the data that I'm giving you. Then we'll look at an overview of cybercrime and why it's significant and so prevalent in society. Then we'll talk about the challenges that are inherent in addressing cybercrime, because it's a very complex problem with multiple facets of process, people, technology, policy, and law. And probably the biggest wild card in addressing cyber defense and spear phishing in particular is the human behavior factor. You know, we can write scripts and codes and all kinds of things to deal with emails as they come in and parse them, but we still haven't gotten technology that can keep people from clicking on bad things. You know, it's still an individual human choice. And then we'll look at applying academic theory as well as business best practices to influencing that human behavior so that you can have a good outcome. And lastly, we'll look at how the COVID-19 global pandemic exacerbates this challenge, both from a human behavior perspective as well as a cybersecurity perspective. And then we'll also look at, you know, how things have changed in the workforce and how those things are affected. So brief introduction. I won't spend very much time here because you're really here more to talk about the information. As was said, I'm the president of the Collective Group, which is a data protection cybersecurity company out of Austin, Texas. We only do services and we don't sell products. We just help and advise people or, you know, install and architect things. I've only had 3 jobs in my life, which is kind of rare in today's age. I went into the United States Army and worked in military intelligence and CID law enforcement, then went to IBM Global Services, and then ended up at my current company, where today I serve as their president. From a volunteer perspective, I serve as a board advisor for the FBI InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership to deal with protecting infrastructure and cybersecurity. And I serve on the Texas A&M Cybersecurity Center's Board of Advisors. I've got most of the technical certifications that you would want to achieve in the security arena. And I serve as an adjunct professor at Texas A&M University, Concordia University, Texas, and Grand Canyon University online. And that allows me to kind of keep up with things and interact with young minds, as well as, you know, stay up to date on the newest developments that are happening in the field. And lastly, there's my LinkedIn profile. If you have any questions or you want to reach out, I'm very happy to interact with anyone, particularly on cybersecurity and academia. I'm a lifelong student myself, done a lot of graduate work in business, information technology and cybersecurity. I just did a MPSA in Homeland Security with my daughter when she was going to Texas A&M, so we could kind of go to school together. And I did a PhD in business administration. And then every couple of years, I'll do a graduate certificate. Currently, I'm doing one with the Harvard University Extension School for cybersecurity, just to keep abreast of new things. Very quickly about my company. It's basically a 23-year-old company. I run it on behalf of a private family here in Austin, Texas. They've done 8 million consultative service hours, and we do everything in the data protection, cybersecurity infrastructure space. across everything from providing companies with really smart people, consulting to help them figure out what they need to do, or managed services where we just own those effects for them. We work with some of the largest companies in the world to deliver, solutions to very large companies and government entities. And, that kind of just gives you a feel for that. I just want to go through that quickly so I wasn't taking up too much of your time. So our goals for today are to discuss how inherent human behavior challenges enable cybercrime, and provide insight that you need to address the challenge, and specify cyber defense business and marketing best practices, and then talk about how COVID-19 is affecting everything. At the end of the day, my hope is to provide enough stimulation for you so that you can frame up the right questions to ask when you go to explore these opportunities on your own, or either do research and those sorts of things. So we'll jump right into a cybercrime overview. Cybercrime is something that we hear about in the news all the time, but many people don't truly understand what it is or how significant it is. So the first piece is, why is cybercrime even an issue? I mean, you have a whole institute that looks at this in theory, or the other side of it, CyberJustice. And the answer is because cybercrime is big business. International cybercrime, if you were to measure it, it has about $1.5 trillion in profits. Now note, that's just profit. That's the money that's made off of that business. So for example, depending on your business, you might have a 20% profit margin. So that says that if you have $1.5 trillion in profits, there's $9 million worth of churn and expense that's going into this activity. So profits is a very light leading indicator. But if we look at that, you can see that there's a bit of paradigm shift in the nature of crime. Basically, there's more crime going on, at certain levels in cyberspace, and it's kind of moved away, or trending to move away from, the physical realm. The reason for that is it doesn't cost much to do it. One of the interesting things about cyber crime and cyber terrorism is a 15-year-old with a laptop can have as much of an impact on the world scale as, a nation state with an army could have had 20 years ago. I mean, literally, if you've got a smart, person with access, they can get in and disable all kinds of things. There's a high yield of return because it costs so little, and you can fling so many things out into the cyber ether. Even if you get a 1% return, it's huge. And there's a low barrier to entry. When you look at the profile of hackers or cyber criminals, they span a large realm. Everything from APTs, or advanced persistent threats, which are big organizations that have funding and resources, either funded by nation states, terrorist organizations, or crime syndicates, and they permeate millions of systems all the time, to what we call script kiddies, which are young kids who don't have a lot of technical savvy to date, but they've gone off in the dark web or the internet and gotten programs where they can make things happen and do things without even understanding how it works. They just apply these tools. And so literally cybercrime can be done on a platform basis, and there's an app for that. You can go out and get an app that will set up a marketing campaign for phishing, or do a distributed denial of service attack. Set it up much like you would download the Facebook app or other apps that you do on your phone, and do productivity. So putting this all in perspective, cybercrime is essentially its own economy. And today we live in a very data-driven economy where you start hearing numbers about 1.5 trillion. It's hard to put that in process without really putting it in context. So $1.5 trillion in profits, like we just talked about, is actually sitting on top of a lot more expense and revenue. But if we just look at that number, that's enough to fund a nation state. Not only is it enough to fund a nation state, it's about as much as Canada generates in gross domestic product. In 2019, Canada had $1.73 trillion in gross domestic product. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of that. If cybercrime were a nation state, it would have the 13th largest gross domestic product of any country. It would be just behind Spain, and just above Spain, and just below South Korea. Just to put that in perspective, that's how big of a business that is. So when you think of large companies that operate in Canada and the United States, this would be all of them put together. So it's a huge, huge business and a huge problem. It's also a major governmental issue. The problem is so big that governments have to work together with all sorts of agencies and things because they just can't deal with it themselves. Basically, you can group these people into two categories, kind of the cyber threat defenders or the good guys. And, at least, from a press point of view, what would be deemed as the bad guys. So, in the United States, for example, they just stood up CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, 2 years ago, specifically as a unit under the Department of Homeland Security to fight cybercrime. For years, they've had the FBI InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership where I go sit in a board meeting, every month with FBI agents and, people from the state of Texas and private companies and literally talk about different threats that are going on, what people are going to do to do that, what the response is needed, how they partner to go respond to things when they happen. We got a briefing from, I don't know if you saw in the news several years ago, the Austin bomber incident. We got to work with the case agents there, see how that came about, how it was distributed, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of investment in both time and resources from the governments to do that. Likewise, in Canada, you have the Communication Security Establishment, and they have the Canada Center for Cybersecurity. In the UK, you have GCHQ and the National Cybersecurity Center. Countries on the other side of this, Russia is talked about a lot in the news and in the body of knowledge. Russia actually has partnerships with their crime syndicates, and they use them for both governmental and crime use. And then state-sponsored cybercrime terrorism, two examples of those are potentially China and North Korea, where they're integrated into the military and other places. And one of the unique things from a justice perspective is we've seen evolving over the last 5 years heterogeneous criminal partnerships where drug cartels will partner with terrorists and cybercrime syndicates to get things done. Because of globalization, these things now cross borders and they can share resources and make things happen. So everything that happens on one side of the equation happens on the other, right? If there's a social network for normal people, there's a social network for, police and government agencies. There's a social network for crime and criminal agencies. All these tools spread. So now we're going to talk about the inherent challenges in combating cybercrime. So the first thing I want to do is look at some examples of actual cases, very minor cases, but we'll illustrate some of the points that we're describing on how complex these are. So if you think back to 2006, which is not that long ago, it's 15 years. Most people on the call were alive then and can remember having computers. I want to look at a specific case of cyberbullying. The case is for a young lady. She was 13 years old. Her name was Meier. And Megan went out and found a boyfriend on MySpace. That'll tell you, how quickly we change. You notice that doesn't say Facebook, right? In 2006, I believe. And she started to have a relationship with that person online. And after several months of interacting and, doing what teenagers do and getting, really excited about one another, this person whom she'd never actually physically met before broke off the relationship because he said she wasn't a quote unquote good friend. That resulted in a dialogue that grew into the taunting and other people, getting involved and kind of smashing on her and shaming her. And eventually she committed suicide over the issue. I'm sure you've heard other stories like this. And the reason we're having this discussion is not because of this injustice so much, but how it was handled. So it comes to find out that there was no boyfriend. It was actually her neighbors next door, the parents of somebody that she had been friends with, who created this online relationship with her because they were upset with her because of a falling out that they had between, her and their daughter. And the whys and wherefores don't really matter so much as just to understand what happened and how it happened. But one of the interesting things is when you look at the law enforcement response, Megan's parents called the sheriff and they explained that they saw messages on the screen and what they saw that they said because they were involved in this whole incident. And the sheriff did not have the resources or the ability to go and find those messages, to reproduce them, to see what they said and that sort of thing. More importantly, once they understood who the perpetrators were, they did not know how to charge them. Between the sheriff and the district attorney and everything, they did not know how to charge them, even though there were 4 laws on the books, arguably one of them since 2001, that specifically prohibited that type of behavior. So that thing went to almost a standstill and became very painful very quickly. Forward now, 10 years into the future in 2016. So I misspoke then, it was 2006, I'm sorry. A decade later, Texas district attorneys were unable to prosecute an online solicitation of a minor. So, they had done in, I think, 2012, 3,000 prosecutions roughly of online solicitation, and that abruptly stopped the next year. And we're going to talk about why. But first, I'm going to share with you a personal example. My daughter, one of my daughters, was solicited by a 22-year-old male who had a supermoto YouTube blog, and he initiated contact with her, through YouTube and Facebook and phone texting, all those sorts of things. Being in technology, I was actually monitoring her interactions as a young teenage girl. And so because I monitored her technology, I saw that instantly. And I stepped in immediately. He was, messaging with her, trying to get him to meet her in the school parking lot when we weren't home. Wanted him to get in a car with her, those sorts of things. Called the police immediately. So the law enforcement response in 10 years was radically different. I spoke to a detective. He was immediately ready to go. We downloaded her Facebook profile. He was able to download everything on her Facebook account, including all of her messages. So we immediately had all of the interactions that happened on Facebook. We were able to identify him and track him down to a person in the matter of a day. That afternoon, he went and conducted an immediate interview with this gentleman and his parents. And then the investigation stopped. I live in Williamson County in Texas. There probably are a couple of case studies on Williamson County. It is arguably the most strict county in all of Texas, and that's kind of saying something. I actually sat on a jury trial for a drug dealer, and the way that the DA opened up his statement for the case was he simply walked up and said, "Drug dealers drive around Williamson County. You have to help us with that." And then he sat down. And then we went through 3 days of a trial, and the jury came to a guilty verdict in under 10 minutes of deliberation, just to give you an idea of how quickly and how strongly that can be. So the question is, why? Why did that happen? Why would the DA, I literally called the DA and wanted to know why they weren't pursuing this, because as you know, they have discretion in the things that they pursue. A 2013 court ruling on a 2005 law invalidated the ability to prosecute. In very simple terms, the legislature of Texas had drafted a law that was very broad, that said it was illegal to think of doing bad things to a minor. I'm paraphrasing grossly. And that was viewed to be unconstitutional as a infringement on the rights to free speech. One of the people that were prosecuted went to court. They got an overturned ruling. They struck a portion of the legal framework that made it unenforceable. So prosecutors stopped prosecuting these cases because they could not win them. So my next step was to contact my state representative in the legislature. It just happened to be 4 months before they were getting ready to go into session. Helped him draft a new bill, solicited a bunch of people from police associations, family, friends, and got a groundswell and actually drafted a new law that was signed into Greg Abbott that year that then allowed them to go on and prosecute these things. But the key points here are that the law enforcement response was drastically different because everybody had adapted. And it's very difficult for the law to reflect what's actually happening on the ground, as I'm sure you know, both from a execution point of view and from a drafting point of view. Now, not everyone will have a technology savvy parent who's maybe type A personality that will grind on people and make a law go to happen. But had that not happened, we'd have went through 2 sessions, and 4 years later, maybe there would have been a law, and it would have taken a long time. So that kind of gives you an idea of some of the challenges. I know many of you are law students and attorneys, so you probably live in this every day. So let's look at cyber defense. Cyber defense, and we'll use that as a broad term to describe actions to go against cyber attacks, as opposed to cybersecurity, which might be the technical response of how you harden an environment and deal with attacks when they happen. There's many ways you can slice this up, but the way that I think is the cleanest is to say there are basically 4 groups of things that you have. You have technology and all the response that goes there. You have policy, whether that's legal policy or corporate policy and governance. And then you have process, which is how you execute those things and the things you put in place. And you have human behavior. Human behavior participates in all levels of those things, But when you actually talk about defending a system, there's usually an end user that's using that system like we are today, using the laptop, putting it out to work. And those users have different levels of access and different levels of significance depending on how they're using those systems, whether it's a technical person that's running a server to keep track of all the patient records in Health Canada, or an end user who's surfing the web, but they happen to be a web developer for Ford, and they're using it in their home network. And even attorneys. One of the interesting things about legal work, when we go in and do security risk assessments for various organizations, the paradigm is radically different for law firms than it is for, say, a hospital. In a hospital, a lot of the valuable data is on the research servers and on the patient data servers. On attorneys and law firms, much of the important data is on the attorney's laptop where they're doing all their casework and stuff like that, and they keep all their records and those sorts of things. So it's very complex, and it changes a lot based on where you are. So basically, when you mix all these things together, you have a really complex problem with multiple moving parts. So if we look at the life cycle of how you would break down doing your cyber defense, there's basically 4 steps that you can do, and then you kind of repeat, and it's a cycle, and you continue to do it and keep yourself safe. The first part is proactive measures, which are things like establishing policies, training users, doing proactive assessments to make sure everything's working like it's supposed to do. The second part is operational defense, which is having a good IT environment, doing patch management on the systems to make sure you're getting all the updates, because cyber criminals are constantly finding holes in systems, and manufacturers are constantly fixing those holes. And that's why every time you use your phone every 3 weeks or so, it asks you to do an update. If you don't do that update, you're putting yourself at risk. I mean, this problem is so big. If you think about somebody developing a piece of software or the next version of the iPhone, the reason why these things are so buggy when they come out is you can't possibly predict the amount of permutations that are going to happen to these devices and software when they go out into the world. There are so many different variations of what people are going to press, what devices they're going to interact with. They interact with, phones, laptops, refrigerators, washers and dryers. You can't recreate all the conditions. And so manufacturers actually put bounties out for white hat hackers or good hackers to go and test systems, and they pay them money when they find problems so that they can fix them. But for operational defense is patch management, system hardening and monitoring. Incident response is where you actually have an incident and you start doing things. What do you do? So for example, there's an inherent disconnect or divide in IT operations and cybersecurity or information security. The first thing that an IT person is going to want to do when there's a cyber attack is turn everything off so that people can't take data from it, they can't get in, it's safe. The last thing a cybersecurity person might want is to erase all the evidence in the freely floating memory and things that are going on and lose access to things. It's a very healthy tension. And then lastly, there is recovery. Recovery is a concept, or backup and recovery, or bare metal restore, is a concept that's been around since computers were conceived. But it is ultimately the way that you recover from any kind of disaster, whether it's a cybersecurity disaster, a power outage, a natural disaster. You recover your data, you build everything back up, and you turn it back on. When we look at these things, as we were just discussing, incident response is something that most people are ill-equipped to handle. Unless you're a large company with a lot of resources, you probably don't have anybody that's an expert in this. You may or may not have anyone who's done it before, and you may not be able to afford to do that. And lastly, by the time you have to do an incident response, it's too little too late, right? Somebody's already in your system, they've already done what they're going to do. That doesn't mean you don't want to mitigate it, but if you're going to apply all your effort, this is probably the last place you want to be applying that effort. You want to have this prepped and ready before anything happens. So that's usually where people focus, and the game is really lost in these other areas. Operational defense is usually a place where people have put a lot of resource and thought. They may or may not be good at it based on their teams and their resources, but this requires relentless and continuous focus, training people, that sort of thing. And then, as we talked about, recovery is something people have done for a long time. Many people have not needed to recover, so they may not have tested where they're at. But the place where you can get the most bang for your buck and effort is the least expense, and the most powerful remedy is proactive measures. Drafting good policy, doing user training and awareness so people don't click on things, and then doing assessments. And a place where people fall down here very often is they assess themselves. So somebody sets up the environment and they look at it and say, yep, it's secure. And they don't know what they haven't seen. They're not bad actors or ill-skilled. You just like proofreading your own work, it's really useful to have somebody else come in and take a look and have a fresh perspective. We're going to talk in detail as to why this first bubble is really important and why you would want to spend your time there. So why is the human factor the most critical part of this equation? Because 91% of cyber attacks start with a spear phishing email, according to Trend Micro. So let's talk about what spear phishing is, and just in case you're unfamiliar with that, I'm pretty sure everybody's heard of it, but phishing attacks are basically attacks that are geared at getting information from a target. So it's analogous to phishing. You throw out a hook, you grab something and you reel it back in. Spear phishing is an order of magnitude more effective because spear phishing caters that phishing attack to the target. So, somebody might get an email saying the CEO wants you to send this document immediately. And they use the CEO's name and they use the person's name in the email and they reference a meeting they had on Thursday. And suddenly that all seems real and somebody reacts without really checking it out. And because of the nature of corporate email, if it looks like it's coming from inside, people inherently trust it. If somebody called you and said, send me all your employee records, you might not do that. But if you got an email from your CEO, many people would do that. In many cases, the IRS have found where people have sent W-2s off to people because they got an executive request. So some key stats: 94% of spear phishing emails send a file attachment. So, you've all gotten emails where, you've gotten a Word document or a resume or something like that. So somebody sends you something that makes you want to open it, whether it's a report or a financial document or a coupon. You click on it, and that's the gateway by which you become infected and the virus is delivered. 6% use alternative sources, such as installing malware by having people click on malicious web links or stuff like that. 70% use common known file extensions. So if you look at this and you take the time to look at the file, it looks like a Word document or a zip file or a spreadsheet, and you go to click on it. If you click on a document and nothing happens, you should raise your hand and call your security people immediately, because it's more likely that something bad has happened than the file didn't work in today's technology. So simply put, we need to stop people from clicking on bad things, and that is much more difficult than you can imagine. I run the company today, but the founder of our company passed away about 3 years ago, and he was off at a board meeting, and I got a one-line email from him that said, are you there? And so I immediately picked up the phone and called him and said, hey, did you need something? You just left. He's like, what are you talking about? Right? It was literally a phishing email from somebody in Africa, and it looked real. Had I not really thought about why would he send me this little terse email and called him, there's some chance I might have interacted with him. And we actually did that for law enforcement, went back and forth. He asked us to go buy some Target gift cards and all kinds of things. And it really is real, and it really is very simple. So how do we stop bad things from happening? Well, the answer to that is what we're going to talk about in the rest of this presentation, right? What can we do to make that happen? We're going to look at practical business and marketing techniques that are used to influence behavior. And we're going to look at a research study that gives recommendations for how to influence user behavior for cyber defense, and a prominent behavioral theory that can be used to influence behavior. I'm sure that many of you went through, undergrad and graduate and talked about lots of theories of how, to manage people and people react to things. And all of this is geared towards creating better cyber citizens so you can improve your, cyber defense posture. So next section we're going to talk about is understanding the human behavior of computer users, because that's really what, we're here to talk about today. So I would submit to you that one way to do that is to look at marketing. In business, marketing is much more than just advertising. Most people think of marketing as simply, making ads. From an academic perspective, it actually compromises the strategy of the company, sales, product development, what you're going to sell, how that stuff gets distributed, how it gets priced, partnerships and alliances, brand management. Marketing really is the strategic part of executing a business and governs how you communicate both internally with stakeholders as well as externally with customers. And we're going to borrow some of that. So we're going to simplify the definition of marketing for our discussion today and focus in on the process of identifying and implementing strategies and tactics to influence human behavior to produce specific outcomes. So we want to use our marketing skills to do that. In business, they do this, to acquire customers and to do sales. In elections, they do that to acquire votes or to get people to support certain efforts or to donate. In cybersecurity, we could use this to create user training and awareness that prevents the bad behaviors that are creating 91% of the cyber attacks that happen in the world. And so that's how we're going to look at that today. And we're going to look at one specific concept that's been used in marketing for many years called market segmentation and talk about how you would go about and do that. So market segmentation is the process of dividing consumers into groups that have like traits and desires or wants so that you can address people. This can be done on a demographic level, age, gender, that sort of thing. It can be done on a psychographic level, people that invest a lot in home health care, people that, want to work out at home, people that are against gun control, whatever, it is you're going to have. Behavioral issues, segmentation, people that have certain behaviors that have to be captured, and then geographic as well. So just to give you a couple examples, I'm in Texas. I drive a Ford F-150. We have some land that's family land that we do hunting and other stuff on, and it's very useful to have a four-wheel drive to go there. When my daughter was 16 and she could drive, she got an F-150. And in Texas, the F-150 is as much a work utility tool as it is a status symbol, right? If you're in New York, there are very few 16-year-old girls who want an F-150, right? They may not even want a car in the busy city. And the marketing group figures out what those messages are for all the different places, because the F-150 can appeal to people that want to haul stuff, people that need it for work, that sort of thing. Likewise, horchata is a drink, basically like a rice pudding-like drink that is very light, served in Mexico and other Latin American countries. In San Antonio, you can find horchata at every Mexican restaurant because they have a very close connection with the border, and a lot of people that are, came from the border and live in San Antonio. Austin has a much more diverse population, and it's very difficult to find horchata in a restaurant. Likewise, when I go to Canada, I can get poutine at McDonald's, right? And my wife likes to go to Swiss Chalet, which we can't get in Texas. But you can't find that in McDonald's here. So that's how segmenting works. We're going to look really quickly at a study we did on phishing to better understand how it happens. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was to use market segmentation to adapt to user training and awareness. So we did a qualitative exploratory study aiming to find ways to empower users to resist phishing. It used semi-structured interviews, and I won't go through this in a painstaking way like we would for a research project, but just give you some context, with subject matter experts, which were defined as cybersecurity professionals that had the CISSP certification. The CISSP certification is a credential that you can get to be certified as a cybersecurity professional. It requires passing a grueling test that has something like a 40% first-time pass rate. And in order to obtain the certification, you have to be peer-reviewed and accepted and have 5 years of documented experience. So it's very grueling, very expensive process. And then much like many of the attorneys today, there are continuing education requirements every year that you have to submit to be able to maintain the certification. Interviews were conducted until saturation was achieved. So basically, we kept interviewing people, asking these open-ended questions with this semi-structured interview guide until 3 out of the 5 last people interviewed gave no new data. So we kept asking the question until we finally got no new answers, and then deemed that we weren't going to do 500 people. We were going to stop and then analyze those answers. So those answers were analyzed with NVivo, a research tool that's used to look at qualitative data, like big data analysis, and identify themes. And 9 specific themes were deemed to contribute to phishing attack effectiveness and helping to protect or helping to protect users from phishing attacks. The first theme was lack of information literacy skills. People who didn't understand how to interact with the computer or how the internet works or how applications work were very prone to succumbing to phishing attacks because they don't, for example, know how to look at an email from Apple and look and see if is it from apple.com as opposed to several other places. The sophistication of miscreant attacks. We use the term often of miscreant for a bad cyber actor, just because it's a term that's not used in common vernacular and kind of gives it an identity or a brand. But these attacks can be so sophisticated. We offer a service using a tool called KnowBe4, which actually sends out phishing messages to people in your company. And then when they click on them, it immediately says, hey, you clicked on a phishing message. This is how you could tell, and then provides training based on whatever we've set up for them. If they've clicked on it before, they get a lot of training. If they just clicked on it one time, maybe they just go through a little web thing and they're done, and then gathers all that in analytics. But we have sent off phishing emails that looked like a Domino's pizza coupon and had people print out the coupon, take it to Domino's and get a discount on their pizza. I mean, a totally fabricated piece. People in high impact job roles are very susceptible for phishing because they have access to the data, and they also deal in high levels of urgency. Meaning if you're the person that the CEO of the company comes to whenever they need something, you're used to acting immediately because you have to do this thing to save the universe. And phishers can take advantage of that. Transactional jobs with high email volume. If you're receiving hundreds of emails a day, that person may not be reading them all. So they're very likely to just click on things, especially when they get behind. People that are unfamiliarity with the concept of phishing and how it works. That's kind of self-explanatory. And then interestingly, people with confidence levels at the extreme ends when it comes to this. People that are very afraid and technophobic are very more likely to get tricked because they reject looking at anything. And usually they get phished by things that are concerns like health concerns or shocking news. And then people on the other end that are just hyper savvy, they become docile and just think they've got it covered because they set up spam filtering or something like that. And then lastly, user training. User training is one of the most important things that you're going to deal with. And one of the more powerful things is familiarity with phishing victims. If you've been burned by this, if you've had somebody take your bank account and take your name and password, just like if you've had somebody use your credit cards, you're suddenly hyper careful, right? You're not going to let that happen again. And then using proficiency testing, kind of like we talked about, where testing people and seeing if they know what they're doing, so that you can figure out who to bother. One of the disasters you can do for training is try to get 35 people in a room or 100 people in a room and talk about one of these concepts, for 3 hours with PowerPoint, right? Some people it doesn't apply to, some people have various levels. If you can reach them on an individualized basis, you'll have a better opportunity to do that. So next we'll look at motivation theory. Motivation theory has been around for a long time, as long as there have been business and management stuff. One way that we can do that is to apply motivation theory. So, motivation theory is used in business, psychology, almost all the social sciences, to talk about how people are influenced and figure out what it is, what their behavior is like. Almost everybody is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is, one of the first motivation theories that really came out from a management perspective. You can see some others, Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory, Adams' equity theory of motivation, which says that, people intrinsically look at how they're compensated or treated and how other people in other places or even other places in the office are treated to see if they're being treated appropriately, and they can become disgruntled if they don't. You can take that further and say that if you don't treat them properly, they may equalize that equation. If you underpay someone and they know they're underpaid and they come and ask you for a raise, if they don't quit, they may start to, make that equal by working less, taking long smoke breaks, stealing office supplies. I mean, a lot of these things are very, high level, but you can rationalize them to make sense. So for this discussion, we're going to talk about a newer theory called the theory of planned behavior, which evolved from the theory of reasoned action in 1980. And TPB has been used to not only explain behavior, but it's used to predict behavior. And that's really the difference. you have to kind of apply the other theories and then use your own rationalization to predict things. We're not going to go into a real crazy dive into the whys and wherefores of TPB, but you can kind of see the diagram. This is from Isaac Ashton, the creator of the theory, and he's kind enough to let us use this for academic presentations. But he basically divides things into three things, right? What is their attitude for the behavior? What is their perceived control? Can they execute it well? And how does that map with their intention, and what do they do? So this predicts volitional behavior. Do you choose to prosecute someone or not? Do you choose to steal something or not? Not what happens when a spider jumps on you, right? I'm going to break this down into some simple, easy questions you can use to rationalize this. But basically what he asserts is that behavioral achievement is dependent on both motivation, your intention, and your ability to do something. People aren't really motivated to do things that they don't think they can win at. He talks about three types of controls: behavioral, normative, and control behaviors or beliefs. And we're going to simplify this into three questions. So if you play in somebody else's inner monologue, basically when they try to decide to do something, I mean, people are different and there are all kinds of motivations, but there are three things that people probably look at either intentionally or subconsciously. One might ask themselves, is this good for me? Should I do this? Is it going to be good for me if I do this? And that's kind of an informational kind of thing, right? You might be able to influence that with information, convince somebody that it's good for them. Can I be successful in executing this behavior? Even if it is good for me, can I do it? Do I know how to do it? Do I have the willpower to do it? So, everybody knows the secret to health and weight loss is move around more, eat less, right? That's not a knowledge problem, but it is, some people can do that. Some people can't for various reasons, but that might be overcome with training, giving them the skills to do that. And then what will other people think of me if I do this? That's a big kind of issue. In companies, for example, you communicate that through policy. I mean, not only culture and those sorts of things, but that's a lot of the reason that policy exists, right? What should we be doing? So how do users perceive that? I mean, outside of the motivational piece, what are some of the biggest challenges that you have to deal with in people's monologue? And if you look on a lot of the TED Talks on cybersecurity, in the past 3 years, you'll see a lot of discussion about this. One of the things we have to overcome when people think about this is, what does cyber miscreant really target me, right? Why would they come after me? Would a cyber miscreant truly target my organization? Are they really going to come down to the Austin office of the Lower Colorado River Authority and find me in my office and do bad things to me? And lastly, is the data that I have valuable or important or dangerous? I don't have anything that they want. Why would they want to come get the data off of my machine? Now, we know in the last movements, consolidating people's privacy info and usage info and stuff, that you can mine a lot of useful things out of that data. But the average user doesn't necessarily understand how those parts go together. And those are the insights that you have to overcome in your training and awareness to make that happen. So if you put all three of those things together, you can end up with a little grid that you can play with. You can start dancing on the left to say, I'm going to look at T7 user training, and then I can use the columns on the right to understand what I have to accomplish in that user training to make it valuable and meaningful. Now that's outside of how do I get them engaged? How do I get them in the room? How do I create the content? But likewise, you can look at this and create sections of this, like a lack of information literacy skills. So for example, we just did a security risk assessment on a community hospital. And, a lot of the people that work at the community hospital, because it's a low-paying government-funded entity for a sparse, geographically populated area, they've been there for 40 years. Some of them don't even use email. So, you got to figure out, how do you make them understand that this is good for you? And one way that you do that is you look at it from a policy perspective and say that, health data is, governed by HIPAA, which is a policy in the US that governs the portability and privacy of patient information. And for every HIPAA violation, there's a $50,000 fine. Now that's something that person can understand immediately. And if they get rid of a binder with, 50 people's data in it, that creates 50 violations potentially. So you can start to play with this to guide you as you go to create that messages. And hopefully that's a tool that you can kind of play with to go and do that. So let's pivot to COVID-19 and how it exacerbates these issues. the world is more digital than ever. We were just talking about, how we're doing this, remotely via WebEx or via remote presentation. And, some academics like to get together in person, but that's not possible right now. It a lot of challenges, right? So COVID-19 has literally changed the world, the way that we work, play, socialize, shop, all kinds of things. Many people work from home now. Many more people work from home than have ever done before. Many people work from home that would not have been able to work from home a year ago because their employers wouldn't have allowed it and their jobs wouldn't have done it. That means they have to have a whole new skill set, right? They have to get up, get themselves ready, put on clothes, make sure they're not watching TV and washing, doing chores. They also utilize their home infrastructure. So earlier we talked about, the components of cyber defense, and one of them was technology. The IT department has little control over what happens in your home. They don't control who you get your internet from. They don't control whether or not you have a router or a firewall. They don't control how it's configured. They don't control what your wireless password is. And they don't control whether or not you let people on the network. So if your work computer is on the network and you have a guest account and that guest account has no password, everybody has access to your work computer. And that's frightening, right? From a cybersecurity standpoint. And somebody can drive and park at your neighbor's house and probably get on your wireless network. Further, people are isolated, right? They don't get to get out and go see people. Many crave human contact, and this video exchange is, a way of getting that human contact. But people may be less than diligent in how they screen the people that they contact with or the people that contact them. And phishing attacks can target COVID-19 concerns, and we're going to go into that in a little bit. So, the industry has reacted to COVID-19 in lots of ways. We see everything from companies sending IT people over to people's homes to set everything up for them, to making them use VPNs and not allowing them to use their work computers off of the VPNs, to setting up VDI, virtual desktop instances, where you use your machine in your browser to access something in a server room and you're not doing any work on your computer. My wife works for Dell and works with Homeland Security. At home, she can't wirelessly do anything. She has to go USB to the printer and that kind of stuff because of the nature of her work. So we're rapidly adapting, but the workforce was not geared for this, both from a work perspective or from a support perspective. And everything is changing from the nature of signing documents and all those kinds of things. As we continue to adapt, the miscreants are adapting as well, right? So new marketing messages or phishing attacks are influenced by COVID-19 effects. We start to see messages from government-sponsored economic incentives, right? So somebody gets an email from the government saying, hey, we just shut down the area and, unemployment incentives done. You can sign up for this program. Now, not only do you have this official looking email and a person at home who may or may not be educated, but they've got an actual honest to God human need to have food and feed their family. How powerful of a motivator is that for them to click on that link, at least to see if it's true, right? And do they have the information literacy skills to parse that, either looking on the email to determine where it's coming from, or to go and call and figure out if the program exists before they start interacting with another human. Financial aid for those affected by the pandemic, they can be contacted by the government, contacted by charity organizations. Who's gonna not at least flinch towards an email that says, one of your neighbors told us that you lost your job and the church has set up for you to get this, click on this to register. Business startup programs, right? We want to help you start an at-home business. Job openings, a lot of people are unemployed, they go to apply to a job. Some people apply and interview for jobs and never having met the people that they work with in the COVID. My daughter graduated from Texas A&M's engineering school with a degree in engineering cybersecurity. She went to work for a large government contractor and started to work on a state contract. She has never physically met the team that she works with, and she is the cybersecurity risk advisor for an entire state, having not actually physically met the people that she works with. Think about that. That doesn't mean she wasn't robustly vetted or any of those things, but the concept is daunting. Job offers, right? Somebody takes you through this phishing process, takes you through an interview, gives you a job offer, and has you fill out a job application with all of your personal info, right? CDC communiques, communications from, Health Canada or other ministries, service availability updates. Electricity just went out in your area, sign up for this, and we'll let you know when it's happening or when these things will be reinstated. And tax rebates, right? Just all kinds of programs that we're seeing. So cyber criminals are adapting to this new world, and our cyber security efforts need to adapt as well. So hopefully some of these tools will give you some thoughts so that you can work with your organizations to go and do that. So to conclude, cybercrime is big business. It drives as much GDP as a major nation state. And I think that's something that people don't internalize enough, exactly how important this is. One of the monologues we talked about was, is this really important? Could it happen to me? Are there really nefarious people behind that? The answer is yes. The human factor is the most challenging piece of the cybersecurity puzzle, and it's not only challenging because, humans are humans, but humans are unpredictable, right? If you walk out of the hallway and you walk into 3 offices and you tell someone you're going to kick a chair and you're going to kick it as hard as you can, depending on the construction of the chair, you can reasonably predict what's going to happen. Is it going to tip over? Is it going to shatter? If you walk out of the hallway and kick 3 people, you get 3 wildly different responses, right? Somebody may attack you, somebody may call the police, somebody may run away. So the human factor is challenging, and that from dealing with cases and people and those sorts of things. But ultimately, people have to be retrained to avoid and respond appropriately to these attacks and understand their significance, because they are the #1 vector. I mean, if people are 91% of the are the enablement for 91% of cyber attacks, if you train 10% of your people better and prevent 10% of the attacks at a high level, you could save, millions of dollars, right? In theory, if that works, kind of like the vaccine, you got to spread it all the way across. But, COVID-19 has made this an order of magnitude harder because people's needs are being played on, right? People have real honest to God pains. And, the fact that, bad people can use this to affect crime is really a shame. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that you found that informative, and I'm happy to stick around if anybody has any questions or wants to have a discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. That was really, really interesting and very clear presentation. And I think we all learned a lot about that, and I think we have a lot of think about now. So I got a question from Stephanie Perlis. Said, terrific presentation. How does fake news or misinformation campaigns affect the marketing message of cybercrime?
I'm sorry, was that a question?
Yeah, from the
Let me
chat.
unplug here and see if I can hear you a little better. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Is this better now?
Hello?
Because I might have a problem with my microphone, so.
That's okay. I can hear you faintly.
All right.
Go ahead, we'll give it a try.
So yeah, I got a question. How does fake news or misinformation campaigns affect the marketing message of cybercrime?
Yep. So fake news is a very prevalent issue. And in cybercrime, what we see with fake news messages is that the cyber hackers will glom onto the passions of people that react to the fake news one way or another. So you either see phishing tactics that revolve around, hey, we've got to go against this thing because, these people on the other side of us are acting really badly and we need to gather funds now. Or you'll see messages where they even, seek to demonstrate that bad behavior and have someone go and sign up on a petition or a list or take an action. So, because fake news in particular, if you point that towards, politics is a very impassioned thing for people. It's a very powerful emotional responder, just like the need for funds and stuff for COVID-19. So that's very insightful. That's absolutely a very big driver for some of the phishing campaigns we see.
Sorry, I have a
Yep.
question about the COVID and like the fact that people are isolated, but also like they don't benefit like the cyber defense, like cybersecurity structure from the company. So how to like reach these people, how to train them when they're in an environment that is really prone to be a target from a cyber attack.
Yep. So there's a couple of ways that you can use training that's very effective. The most effective phishing training out there, two of the companies that do this, and they're both very good. One is called Know Before, KNOWBE, number 4, and the other one is called PhishMe, PHISH-me, and both of them operate on a platform. This is more for organizations where someone that's administrating this platform can send out emails that are phishing emails. Literally, you can send them out to everybody in the company or a subset, and then people either click on them or they don't. So if they click on them, they immediately get feedback, kind of like I was describing before, where you say, hey, this was a phishing email. Here's how you can see it. And it draws a little circle on the screen and says, here's what the email URL looks like. You can see this says .itbx instead of .ibm. And here it's got bad grammar, and here it's got this and this and this. And then based on the profile that's set up by the team, it will then have a secondary response, which can be, please don't do this again, go do this online training. And then it keeps track of that. So you can build an algorithm that says, if somebody doesn't click, then we just send them a message the next time we do it. If they click the first time, we do light training. And then if they click another time, we do heavy training. If they click the third time, they go see their supervisor. So these sorts of practical trainings are actually very good because they don't start off with a, get in front of everybody and talk to them and hope they're paying attention. It only hits the people that are doing it, and you don't have to gather them at all. So those are some of the most effective things that you can do. If you don't have that kind of environment, or you're looking more at individuals, then you have to point them to resources and hope they engage, right? A lot of times people do that with YouTube videos and those sorts of things. And the most effective of those themes that work for people that you can't engage and truly train is to show them severe incidents that happen so that it crystallizes as something significant in their mind. So for example, my mother-in-law, who's not very technical, she will only send me things when she finds things that she finds very personally offensive or very personally significant, like, there's this credit card scam that, steals your house, or, whatever it is that prompts her to react. But the severeness of that story has engaged her, and that's how you have to engage those people. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. For example, when people look at that internal monologue that say, they really wouldn't come after me. There was a Target data breach, I believe in 2011, if memory serves, that was highly touted because it was one of the first credit card personal data breaches that did massive millions of things. That breach was actually perpetrated through the use of an air conditioning subcontract company. Right. So yes, they really will look at somebody to go make something happen, right? And a USB drive, right? So if you can kind of make those examples for those people, you can get them engaged, and hopefully they go do that research themselves, or at least become more interested in the topic.
Thank you very much. I think it's very clear. Speaking of, you presented like most common, I would say, insight for people to be targeted by cyber attacks. My question is, what about like cyber attacks that take advantage from bias, like human behavior bias? How would you educate people to question this and sort of being like, okay, this email is trying to take advantage of one of my bias. Do you think that would be a useful approach to like sensitive people in taking care of what they receive as spear phishing?
Yep. Is the word you're using, is that bias?
Yeah.
IAS?
Like human behavior bias.
Yep. So the earlier example we talked about with fake news takes advantage of bias, right? Somebody's passionate on one way or another. But yes, I mean, in order to get someone to listen to something, there has to be some value to it, right? So the value can be, you know, I'm going to get $100. That's why, you know, people get contacted by princes that just need $1,000 and then they'll give you $100,000. But bias is a big one. And that's very insightful comment, because a lot of times bias is more infused in belief than fact, right? And it can be very difficult to overcome bias, which is why we have all these challenges, right? So agreed, bias is a very, very powerful motivator. And, you know, because people just act, you just believe, you just do, you don't reason, you don't logic, you don't, you know, do that. If your bias could have been overcome with logic, it would have happened a long time ago in theory, right? So yes, you can try and train for that, but, you know, probably the best way to do that is to focus less on the bias from a direct communication perspective with that person and more on the call to action and the urgency, right? So because you're less, I think it'd be very admirable, and you should try to educate people and get rid of their biases. But if you want to change their behavior tomorrow, you probably want to focus on the ramifications of people taking advantage of their beliefs and couch it in a more positive nature, as opposed to don't be biased, right? You know, you're very passionate about this belief and people are using that to do these horrible things that you don't want to happen.
Yeah, especially in this COVID period, like people
Yes, especially in the COVID period.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we don't have enough questions anymore. So I'd like to thank you very much for having accepted our invitation, and thank you for this this really interesting presentation. And I think that was really enlightening and really clear about. And also we had like a complete picture of like cybersecurity and how spear phishing interact in this environment of cyber attacks. So I'd like to thank the viewers who attended to this web conference and who asked questions to our speaker today. And I'd like to wish you all a very good day, and take care of yourselves. And I see you for a next scientific online activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you.